Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Auld, Heids, Mike and myself. This evening, we've got Denise Findlay. Anybody who followed the Good Guys thing with the NEC will recognise the name, if not the face. Denise was the person who put everything together with the Good Guys list that ended up basically allowing the NEC to be taken back from the extremists who were in control of it last year. Welcome, Denise.
Hi.
And we've also got Mark Hirst, who's, I think this is your third time on, Mark, is it? You're a little bit lighter in weight this time, as in there's a lot of big weight off your shoulders rather than you've been dieting. Because we've had some good news for you this week as well. Welcome again.
Thanks. Nice to see you guys.
Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Dave. Maybe just start this off by making sure everyone's aware that we record this. We're recording it on a Sunday to appear on Tuesday the 12th, 7 p.m. With everything that's going on, things could have erupted even further between Sunday and Tuesday. So if we're not absolutely 100% up to date with everything that's happening, forgive us. Denise, you're very, very welcome. And Mark, nice to see you again. I'd like to kick off with you, Mark. And I think, like everyone in the whole Yes movement, welcome your freedom. You've been through a hell of a time, my friend. Could you maybe just talk us through how you experienced it all between the initial problems and the fact that you can now breathe again?
Yeah, well, as you can imagine, it's quite a long story, but I suppose it really started over 2 years ago. I was asked, Alex Salmond asked me to become an associate producer for his show, to produce 2 special episodes that he was working on. And we had a kind of brief discussion on the phone, and then he invited me through to a hotel just outside Edinburgh, which I thought would be a kind of straightforward production meeting. My background before I worked at Sputnik, before I worked at STV, was in documentary filmmaking. And he was wanting to do a kind of documentary feel type of show, two episodes. But to my surprise, it was just after the, obviously the disclosures, the Daily Record story that broke the initial story of the complaints that had been levelled against him, the allegations which were found to be untrue and false. And to my astonishment, he began to tell me in some detail the background that had happened, that had taken place. And I was shocked. And obviously, I've known about this. Other people, I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one that's been aware of this. And then through speaking to various people that I know, MPs, MSPs, other people within the Yes movement, it became clear that there was something diabolical taking place. So I've kind of known the details, and I was kind of hinting at that. If you go back my timeline over the last 2 years, you'll see various references to that, and certainly to the leadership. Now, initially, obviously, as anyone knows, if you're critical of Nicola, you can get monstered quite quickly by certain loyalist elements. And I mean, I can understand it to an extent. I mean, I've said many times that although I worked at the Scottish Parliament for 9 years on and off, and although I could never be described as a Nicola Sturgeon fan, I knew her private personality, her private character was very different from the one that she presents publicly. Even I was absolutely shocked. And I came away from that first meeting with Alex, and I just sat in the car and felt shocked and depressed, understanding, like I think many in the movement are beginning to realise now, of the potential consequences this may have for the independence movement. And obviously I've spoken to Alex many times since then, and I mean, he's acutely aware of that as well. But he's also aware that certain individuals have colluded and campaigned, and I can tell you because I've seen the paperwork for this. That campaign is very much ongoing to smear Alex Salmond and anyone around him. That these people tried to jail him for a political purpose. It's outrageous. Now, if we didn't have an utterly corrupt prosecution service, the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, I'm certain certain individuals would be facing conspiracy to pervert the course of justice charges. And if we had a functioning prosecution service, that's exactly what would take place. We don't have that. So anyway, to cut a long story short, I was cited as a witness in the Alex Salmond trial. I wasn't actually called in the end because I'd previously been I'd been head of the SNP chapel of the National Union of Journalists at the Scottish Parliament. I'd also previously been convener of the Staff Association, the SNP Staff Association, and so I was well aware of many of the issues that had taken place within the group during my time there. And also, crucially, I was also aware that when the SNP announced that they were going to have basically a scoping exercise to determine if any former staff had been concerns about historical issues, that they should come forward. But they only contacted selected people. There was very senior members of staff, former head of communications at the SNP, myself. You would think if anyone had heard anything inappropriate, they might have contacted the staff representative. I wasn't called, so my evidence was going to be around that. In the end, it became apparent that the Crown case against Alex Salmond began to collapse towards the end, and I was notified. I think it was halfway through the trial that I was not going to be called in the end, and that would have been the end of it after he was acquitted. But obviously, when it became clear that there was joint statements going out from certain Scottish-funded charity organisations, it was quite clear that the campaign was going to be continued. And I'm still shocked that they did that. It seems to me that the greatest contempt of court being shown is by those who have failed to accept the verdicts and probably don't accept the verdict of my case or that of Alex Salmond. Yet we're the ones that are being persecuted. So it's an outrage. So I never planned to do the video in question. It wasn't pre-written. I was actually out walking the dog, and it was actually getting cold, and I decided just to record my thoughts on the video. It was posted on an unlisted link, so it wasn't public. You couldn't Google search for it. It was just going to be going out to my Twitter followers, I thought. And it was just my own thoughts off the top of my head in response to having thought about what was going on and the injustice of it, really. And then what happened was a freelancer working for STV, a man called Findlay Russell. He broke a story on STV News, which he didn't come to me for comment on before he ran it. Findlay is now Director of Communications for the Scottish Conservative Party, incidentally. And so anyway, next thing I knew, Paul Hutchin was on the phone saying there'd been complaints to the police. I contacted the police, they knew nothing about it. Contacted them a few days later, they didn't know anything about it. And then 5 detectives rocked up on 20th of April with a search warrant, proceeded to go through the house, seize all the computer equipment, and then all the way, we've had all the issues all the way through. The charge was actually initially a breach of 127 under the Communications Act. That was amended when it became clear the Crown couldn't sustain that charge. And so it was charged under Section 38 of the Criminal Justice Act, which is basically a breach of the peace. But the threshold is much, much lower. So it's one of the most easiest criminal offences to be prosecuted for. And the potential penalty of that, if I'd been found guilty, was possibly 12 months in prison and an unlimited fine. So it wasn't a nice thing to have hanging over me by any stretch of the imagination. But, justice has been done in the end. And obviously my reputation has taken an absolute hammering. I've lost work on the back of it. I'm actually looking at legal remedies regarding that after certain clients withdrew work just because I was facing trial. So the concept of innocent till proven guilty isn't one that's really operating, in my experience, in Scotland.
I think that's the thing, Mark, that's maybe not adequately visible to people. You know, your name will be mentioned, the fact that you've been charged will be mentioned, but the actual price you have to pay, you know, deprived of the computer which you use. As anyone watching this program, imagine you don't have your PC, imagine you don't have your mobile phone, imagine you're not a rich person, imagine you can't get any work. There's a heavy price to be paid for something that ultimately took so long to come to court and then to be found as not established. Could you comment on how you actually survived that period?
With great difficulty. I mean, it's still difficult, you know. Once the legal fees are paid, you know, unlike everyone else, I'll be, you know, it's going to be a struggle. I've had some really great support from close friends and family, and but yeah, the court. I mean, they're taken away. I mean, this is the kind of thing. I mean, it's interesting to see that some of the coverage, even after I was acquitted, Kremlin-backed or former Kremlin worker, broadcaster, whatever. And trying to time in. Now, I left Sputnik in June 2019, but they're linking that in, and I've been referred to as a blogger. And the professional body, obviously, today has. They were quite surprised that I was being referred to that, because I've held a press card for over 20 years. I've been working in journalism for that amount of time, and it's part of this kind of smear effort, you know, to diminish you, to attack your reputation. And it says a lot as well about the state of political journalism in Scotland. We've discussed this in the past on previous shows. And but notably, those outlets who ran the sensationalist stuff about my arrest in the first place, obviously they're not covering my acquittal, but that's on the list of things that I'll be discussing with the lawyers next week.
Well, you've not only got yourself, you've got Craig Murray coming up as well. There's an awful lot of, I don't know, Dave and I raised this between ourselves and a discussion we had, was when you start getting into the two words malicious prosecution. And I think there's as much evidence as anyone needs. Can I ask you, when you're dealing with, just to broaden it a wee bit, as I understand it, someone complained about what you had done, as opposed to perhaps the Police Scotland looking at every video, every social media outlet to catch us all out. And you go through all of that and you end up, and you're better at describing this, Mark, than I am, but when the sheriff finally said you're a free man, what was his verdict in terms of the evidence that had been put forward? Can you describe what his kind of final words were?
Well, the summary of what was said was that, well, there's two main arguments that the defence made. My advocate opened with pressing for a motion of no case to answer. Now, sometimes that can be dismissed right from the outset, and the concern we had was that it's easy for the Crown to appeal if the court immediately accepts that without actually hearing the evidence that was led. So my advocate very cleverly said, we're moving for a motion of no case to answer, and I'm going to set out to the court why there is no case to answer, which allowed him to present the evidence, which was in two distinct parts. And the first bit was really focused on whether what was said fell properly within the scope of Section 38 of the Criminal Justice Act, that it was in some way threatening or abusive, and that my advocate successfully argued, obviously, that it didn't fall within, the test, the legal test that a sheriff must apply is, would a reasonable person, an average reasonable person, and that doesn't mean the complainers' views are not what the court considers. It's, would an average reasonable person looking at that footage, would they be threatened and alarmed, yes or no? And that's the test that the sheriff has to apply. And so my advocate refer to various case law where Section 38 cases have been tried in Scottish courts. And then he went on to Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which is, of course, a convention that covers freedom of expression. And he successfully argued that consideration of the video and whether it constituted a threat, a genuine threat, had to be taken in parallel with my rights of freedom of speech. So it's both whether what was said is a threat itself under Section 38, and also the fact that I'm entitled to have opinions and views which are my own within a political context. The fact that the court recognised that I am a professional, officially accredited journalist, and I am a political activist. And that was what the court determined. And the sheriff ruled that it was his view that no reasonable person could have in any way have felt threatened by what was said in the video. And he stated it was my opinion, nothing more than that. And basically that's the essence of what was said. There's no written judgment, unfortunately, in the Sheriff Court, and to get a transcript, you have to pay yourself as a defendant to get a full transcript. I very much loved to study everything that was said again, but that was the essence of it. So there was no witnesses called. There was no cross-examination of witnesses. It was very simple. And also the other key thing was we weren't contesting that it wasn't me in the video. Obviously, it's very hard to disguise only a face a mother could love. But so we weren't arguing that. The other key aspect, however, was that we provided the court, and this was accepted, we had a joint minute of agreement on key evidence. And the key phrases, obviously, that the prosecution were trying to hammer home were on reap a whirlwind, there's going to be a reckoning, etc. And we had pages and pages of where those phrases are uttered all the time by politicians, by journalists, have been uttered by Nicola Sturgeon, by Boris Johnson, a part of common political parlance all the time. And for them to selectively choose to bring this prosecution shows that there's a high degree of politicisation in this. And my advocate had said right at the start, if it wasn't for the fact that I know Alex Salmond, I'm a supporter of Alex Salmond, there's no way this prosecution would have been brought against me. This is part of a big, big problem we have right at the heart of the Crown Office. And what you're saying about the broader thing, not just my case, apart from the legal remedies that I'm going to explore in relation to my case, we have to go much, much bigger than that. And eventually, we should have a full inquiry into the oversight and exactly what's going on, the operations of the Crown Office. Because my case isn't the only one, neither is Alex Salmond. There's numerous other cases where the big, big questions need to be asked of the Crown Office's actions, and I hope we get to them.
Thanks for all that, Mark. The reason I raise it is, I'm going to bring Denise in at this point. You and I, Denise, have to sit down. I'm not worried about Dave Llewellyn. He's just outrageous at the best of times. But for normal folk like you and I, how careful do we have to be? How careful do you feel you have to be with what you watch going on? With you say something which is quite straightforward, but all of a sudden the police or the procurator decides, no, it's not straightforward, we're coming after you. That is a definite atmosphere. Denise, would you like to comment that from your own perspective?
Yeah, I totally agree. There's this thing called chilling effect, and it's on the Article 10 right of free expression. And I fear that in Scotland, we don't have our Article 10 right anymore, because I am too scared to say things, and I won't be the only one that's too scared. And it's going to get worse because Humza Yousaf is bringing in a hate crimes bill. And in committee, he said, one of the things I'm very concerned of, as well as independence is my most important, but I'm also very concerned on women's rights. And as you might know, there's, as well as the Salmond Sturgeon fight online, there's the trans extremists, as they call them, and versus women fight. And in his committee, he said that a person that said a trans woman is a biological male, that can be hate. That could be up in front of the court. And when he was asked, oh, well, you know, if it's not inciting violence, how will you know what the intent was behind it? He then said, the court will decide. Now, we've just heard from Mark the absolute hell that you go through when you're charged with these things, the effect on your career, your relationships, your finances, your mental health is horrendous. So you're expecting a woman to stand up for her rights and you're threatening her with court. So it's only going to get worse. And at the moment, it isn't safe. It's not safe to speak out in Scotland. And that is a subject that is it's against our human rights. So yes, I am worried about it, obviously. And then the other things I think, you know, is like a problem with the way our discourse is going. It's very one-sided. So it's like if you offend the government line, you're in trouble. And that is very worrying between the police, the Crown Prosecution Service. And also government-funded bodies. So Mark brought up the rape crisis people. And I have just recently had an experience of this. My daughter was in a group of survivors that was the reference group. It was her thing, I let her do it. And they wanted to be able to ask for a female. My daughter was very clear, it was a female she wanted. And then what happened was that it went to the committee, and the committee unanimously said that they wanted this word gender changed to sex so that people could ask for the sex. The survivors wanted it to be sex. There was a campaign by us women because the Scottish government rejected that, and they said it was to be gender. It wasn't needed because sex and gender was interchangeable. The people that the survivors was working with in rape crisis during the campaign, the week where this amendment was to be debated, put out a statement contradicting the survivors and asking the Scottish government not to approve the amendment to change gender to sex. So you've got a government-funded body putting out statements in support of the government. And we have exactly the same thing going in court at the moment, because For Women Scotland is taking the government to court for redefining women to include men. So the sex class of women does not include men, is possibly get you in court and Humza gets his way. So they're going, because the Scottish government in the women representation of women on public boards, trying to balance out women in public boards, includes men as women, basically. And really, you just have to say, like, I intend to be a woman someday, and you're a woman, according to Humza. So that bill is being challenged, but we've had to crowdfund, almost coming up 90,000, up to £100,000. And the people that are challenging For Women Scotland have intervened, which is putting up the For Women costs. So they're going against the Scottish government, are government-funded bodies. So the government is funding bodies to intervene in court cases when you go try and challenge the government. That is wrong. That's our tax. So we're paying our taxes to get our government. The government gives our taxes to these funded bodies. Then we're crowdfunding to take cases against the government, and these bodies are intervening. Yeah, they're not independent at all.
Sorry, Denise.
I know that's a little bit not the same as the Crown. They're frightened to stand up for women's rights because they'll be all over the papers and possibly in court. And we do have a chilling effect in Scotland on free speech, without a doubt.
Where I wanted to go with this is to take you into the area that I think Mark has an interest in, which is called the Crown Office. Mm-hmm. And just using one instance of that, just one solitary one, we already know that they have cost the public purse millions and millions and millions of pounds on something they openly admit are malicious prosecutions. And that ties in exactly with what you're saying is, hang on a minute, we are funding the Crown Office and then we're having to fund ourselves if we're challenged. And then we sit down and say, right, what's the after effect of that? And the after effect is exactly what Mark described. You're left having seen a whole dosh of money go out to prove your innocence, but there doesn't seem to be any recourse against those who have incompetently at best arranged a malicious prosecution. I warned you I wanted to talk about something just to try and give you an instance of my constant theme in this, and Dave knows this, is that Scotland has not prepared well enough for its independence. There's a whole load of things, whether it's having a constitution written, whether it's to do with the currency question, a whole bundle of things. If you stick with me for a second, I'm going to read you something that I dug up. I actually put it aside about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and it comes from California. In California, they have what are called county grand juries. There's 58 county grand juries. There's one in each county. They're convened on an annual basis by the superior courts. It comes down from the court and has three functions. First function is investigating and reporting on the operation of local government. That's kind of more a civil thing, but if you think about what's happening at Loch Lomond at the moment, that might apply. But the two other functions that it has, to me, are important. First of all, literally issuing criminal indictments to require defendants to go to trial on felony charges. And then here's the last one: investigating allegations of public officials' corrupt or willful misconduct in office, and when warranted, filing an accusation against that official to remove him or her from that office. Give me a second while I clear my screen. I saw that, as I say, about 5 or 6 years ago, and I said, I'm going to keep that copy. It's taken me about a day to find it. I had to go and Google my own laptop to find it. We've got a Lord Advocate who's in charge of all of this, and Mark, I'll draw you in this. And it's not just the malicious prosecutions. In any other walk of life, if you had just cost clients millions and millions and millions of pounds, and then admittedly you'd done it maliciously, you would not still be in post. Same applies to a senior civil servant when she start raising judicial reviews over things, which have cost us public money, £500,000, and let's say an equivalent on the other side. I'll shut up at this stage. We have to find a way of dealing with that in the future. We can't just let it pass.
Exactly. I mean, of course, just to correct you slightly, Mike, the judicial review was brought by Alex Salmond against the Scottish Government.
Beg your pardon, right?
But,
Yep.
I mean, nonetheless, that he was forced into that position because of this unlawful, tainted with bias process, this illegal process that the Scottish Government were bringing against them. And I mean, this is still to come out. It's been hinted at by the inquiry, parliamentary inquiry into the Scottish Government that's ongoing at the moment. But this is why MSPs are asking, when was the legal advice by Roddy Dunlop QC, the head of Dean of Faculty, when was his advice to the Scottish Government that you've no chance of winning this? Because someone took a decision to continue all the way up to judicial review because they realised that this wasn't about legal processes. And this is very, very serious, because I have no doubt that there are levels of corruption at the heart and the top of Scottish Government and the Crown Office that have allowed this to continue with the objective, the political objective of destroying Alex Salmond's reputation and removing him as a potential threat. People keep asking me, I don't understand, why on earth would Nicola Sturgeon want to do this to Alex Salmond? Why would she instigate this campaign? I've always steered away from the word conspiracy because I think it's heavily loaded term. I think what we're seeing is groupthink, people understanding, both in the Crown Office and at the head of the Scottish Government and the SNP, there's an understanding there that they have mutually beneficial interests that they are seeking to defend. But the key thing is that Nicola Sturgeon, her office, the paper trail goes right back to her office. At the moment, the Crown Office are persisting in threatening Alex Salmond with a further criminal prosecution if he tells the truth before the inquiry, if he details that audit trail, that paper trail that shows there has been active collusion by this government. So how do we deal with that? Well, there has to be a level of political will. I don't see really any, I mean, with the exception of a number of elected representatives. And again, this is part of the chilling effect that Denise mentioned. I don't see any of the SNP parliamentary group having the guts to call for what is needed to sort this problem out. And we need an inquiry. We need some kind of public inquiry, judge-led inquiry into what's happening with the Crown Office, because I know for a fact that the Faculty of Advocates, senior QCs, are deeply, deeply unhappy with the way that the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service is operating, because the danger is it brings into disrepute the entire system. It destroys public confidence and trust. And I think certain key individuals at the Crown Office that needs to be a bright light shone on, and it's not just the Lord Advocate, but the Crown Agent, David Harvey, and also Lindsay Miller at the Crown Office. I've seen paperwork with Lindsay Miller that shows she blatantly lied to an elected member of Parliament. You cannot have, in a democracy, senior officials in the prosecution service conducting themselves in that manner. It's an absolute outrage, and it has to be dealt with. It's corruption we're dealing with.
The reason I read out those paragraphs, and thanks for bearing with me while I do, were it me, I'd like to see just a jury convened. You were deprived of a jury in front of a sheriff, Mark, but Alec, God bless him, wasn't. To ask the Procurator Fiscal's Office, can we please see how you put this case together? Whatever case we're talking about, I'm thinking of the malicious prosecution ones, the Rangers case where there's millions involved. But we're also in the position, Dave, I try and bring you in here, we're also in the position in the Craig Murray situation where he is being accused and asking for evidence so he can defend himself. Would you like to speak on that for a second, please?
Aye, regarding Craig, basically, the evidence that he is asking for the Crown Office for his defence, that he knows exists because it's the same evidence that Alex Salmond wants to give to the Parliament inquiry. So they both know that it exists, but at the moment the Crown Office are refusing to release it to Craig, and that may well be a way for Craig's lawyers to go, because they've got a legal obligation to have to supply that. Whether or not they do, of course, is another story, given the fact that one of the reasons I think they gave it to Wings was that they didn't want to do anything that would put the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service in a disrepute, which, given the last 6 months, has got to be one of the funniest things we've ever heard. Basically, that's the way I see it as far as Craig's concerned. I also think that they're going to be seriously out to get him. I mean, at the end of the day, Alec's now been acquitted, Mark's now been acquitted, and they've set up all these little dominoes that they were hoping to be all knocked down, and everyone's been knocked over. Now, there's an awful lot of jiggery-pokery going on with Craig's case to deny him the right that he has as a defendant to be able to present a defence, and hopefully that's going to be resolved. And if it's not, then I think he's got a great chance of having a mistrial, although it's not technically a trial of the jury, because It depends. It depends on whether Lady Dorian's going to actually ask for this paperwork. But Lady Dorian knows it exists because she saw it during the Salmon case. I mean, it's the same judge. So it's interesting times.
The difficulty for the Crown, and this is why they're resisting it so much, is got to be careful with what I say here, but if this paperwork is made available, then it clearly shows the level of collusion that was going on, which is the context of both the comments of both Craig's articles and the context in which my comments were made, that there has been a campaign and a multi-layered level of collusion at the senior levels of both the Scottish National Party and the Scottish Government. And it's been aided and abetted by the Crown Office. And that's the difficulty. And the Crown Office are in a bit of trouble here, but the big problem we have no mechanism, we have no institution within that framework of governance that can haul the Crown Office in and challenge them. And we'll have to find a way to do that. Now, one of the ways would be to divide completely this curious position of the Lord Advocate holding both this position within the Cabinet and as head of the Prosecution Service, and dividing that completely. I mean, I have it on authority. He's been very private about his beliefs, but I think it's fairly well known within legal circles that James Wolfe is a unionist. So little wonder, for example, he's advising the Scottish Government that the only legal way you can hold a second referendum is if you ask permission via Section 30 consent. Well, of course he's going to do that. And I think there is maybe an argument that your Lord Advocate or the legal advice to the government, separate from the prosecution, has some understanding of the political objectives of the government in which he's a member of. And it seems to me that James Wolfe's position is incompatible with those values. So there's this is why it needs a review. This is why it needs a judge-led review to bring forward, investigate what's going on, and then bring forward recommendations to sort that out.
But I don't understand how that can work, Mark. I'm sorry, because if you're saying that the people that are colluding with each other are the SNP party and the Scottish Government and various other officers, why would the SNP why would the Scottish Government then bring in something that will ruin their power? Why would they change it? Because they've got power at the moment. So I don't see any way through this but a political way. Somebody has to take control politically, get elected. There's only a political solution to this. There's no other solution. So
well, I agree with that. I actually agree with you. That's what I mentioned before. I don't think that there's anyone with the courage within the Parliament, but that is what is needed. And I mean, one of the mechanisms, of course, would be a public petition through the Petitions Committee to demonstrate if you would need a prominent support from senior legal figures and others. And I think there is support there to be mined, and then build the pressure that way. But the trouble is, as you know, Denise, much of the parliamentary group is populated with, frankly, nodding dogs. The reason they're in those positions is they've towed the line, that they don't want to rock the boat. And I mean, that's one of the fears, I suppose, that with this election coming up, it simply reinforces that kind of complacency and Nicola Sturgeon's dominance. And we have a lot of thinking to do about how we go forward from there.
I think it's very, sorry, I was just going to say, okay. So I was going to say that one thing I've really noticed, and it really came to me this morning when I watched John Swinney on the Politics show, when he continued the smear with Alex Salmond. We see Alex Salmond as part of the Yes movement, one of the leaders of the Yes movement. So, but the SNP see him as an opponent, and that came to me. So when he was acquitted on all charges, Joanna Cherry and a couple of others said, great, congratulations, welcome back into the SNP. But obviously nobody else did. And he could go back into the SNP if he wanted, he could apply. He's not got any black mark on his character at all. So there's no reason that Stuart Stevenson, whose decision it would be, wouldn't let him back in. But today and yesterday, seeing the statements on his evidence, which is purely factual evidence, and the thing about the evidence, the letter, every single thing in that letter is already known. He's not telling anybody anything they don't know. It's been on wings. And the other point about it is unionists can read. They've read the same letter as us. They know what we know. So it just came to me that they're treating him as an opponent. And I don't understand why that is, because he's not an opponent. He is one of the most important people in the Yes movement. So that's my upset, shall I say. I'm upset about that, genuinely upset. Because
let me use it, Denise. You did a huge amount of work, as I understand it, on what are known as the good guys,
yeah.
Right? You now have a reconstituted NEC. What are your hopes that will come out of that reconstituted NEC now that you've got some people in that you believe? My first thinking is very simply, amongst all the other bits that are going to come out, is what is Douglas Chapman going to find out about money that was put forward for a particular reason?
Yeah.
And people are having difficulty explaining where it's gone. What are your hopes for the reconstituted NEC?
Okay, well, there is still an issue, quite a big issue with the reconstituted NEC, is the affiliated groups, because there's around about 9 votes that we don't actually elect from conference. And those 9 votes tend to be more I kind of divide there's the gender people, the trans allies. That's a power base. And that's Nicola's power base. She's, like nurtured these people and promised them quite a lot, but she's not really delivering. So they're a bit annoyed with her, and some people have gone off to the Greens. But generally, they're still on the NEC because they come onto the NEC through the affiliated organisations, which is 9 votes. So, but I did a lot of calculations and figured out that we're probably okay on balance on the NEC for the sensible people and the ones, but there's going to be inertia. Keith Brown, Kirsten Oswald are on the NEC, and they're Nicola's people. So there's the Nicola loyalists, and then there's the people that want to change things and get independence. So the NEC is better, but it's not good enough. Next year, we have to do a bit of a better job. The committees, so you have the Policy Development Committee is good. Lots of good people on it, economists, all sorts, very good. The Conference Committee is good. So we might actually get to debate policies at conference, which will be a massive improvement. And then the Conduct Committee is good. Apart from, I have a bit of thing with the chair of that Conduct Committee, but I'll say it's mainly about 8 people that are good out of the 6 people out of the 9 are really good. Including Neil Hanvey, who went through the process, so he's an excellent person, and the Appeals Committee has always been fine. So I think, generally speaking, it's better, but it's still not good enough. I think the Nicola will keep a strong grasp on it because she's encountered a few setbacks. She didn't get really any of her pet people selected as MSPs, and that loses her authority a bit. The NEC went for put Indy first, take the party back, sensible folk, and then she lost the 6 words amendment when her MSPs were willing to actually break the whip. So she's not as powerful as maybe some people think she is. I understand about her popularity in the country, And I do say, just for the record, she's a very good First Minister. She's very popular. She gets high approval ratings, but approval ratings go up and down. And she's good managerial. But what she can't do at all is progress the case for independence or the process of independence. It's whether it's too much for her. Running the country is enough, things, and she can't really manage to do the strategy for independence. So she's come up with this unworkable strategy, and it's a bad plan, the Section 30, because it puts power into the hands of our opponents. Why on earth would you give your opponents power? And then the second thing about the bad plan is that it's a dead plan. There is no chance that a British Prime Minister of any party will ever grant a Section 30. Now, what we have to do as a movement is accept that and stop this fantasy, because it is a nonsense fantasy. We are to get independence. It's going to be a fight. The British aren't going to roll over and go, here's your Section 30, by Scotland, take your oil, take your water, take all your natural resources, we'll be fine. They're not. They're going to fight to keep us, and they're certainly not going to give a Section 30. So we need a plan B. The other thing that really annoys me is politicians that lie. I just can't deal with it. And you've got people that are telling you there's going to be an independence referendum in 2021, when they know beyond all doubt there can't be. And the reason is this. The Scottish Government put through a referendums bill, and in that bill, they committed to having the question tested. The question testing takes 12 weeks. They have not started testing the question. And I actually asked the Electoral Commission this, and I got a reply, and it told me they haven't started to test it. They've been told to put it on hold. Then they have to put through the actual bill for the referendum. Now, the Scotland Act has a provision in it which says any bill between being passed by the Scottish Parliament and becoming law is open to a legal challenge. Now, you can absolutely bet any amount of money that a unionist MSP will challenge any referendum bill that's put through the Scottish Parliament. So therefore, we'll have a legal challenge. Now, if we don't have a legal challenge, because I'm not even going to talk about Section 30 because it's ridiculous, we'll have a legal challenge, will take a good amount of time. Then the Electoral Commission requires 6 months to actually organise an independence referendum. And if people say we can bypass them, we can't, because, in international terms, this has to be rock solid democratically. So we need the Electoral Commission with us on this. So that rules out 2021 completely for an independence referendum. And if anybody, any politician, I don't mean, faith-based indie supporters, I mean politician tells you there will be an independence referendum in 2021, they are lying to you. And that's
Can I pick up and
Can I come in, Mike, just for a second?
On you go, Dave.
Actually, Denise, there is one way it can be done in 2021, and that is if Martin Keating wins his case. And they're forced to call it as a plebiscite election on May the 6th. And the reason that could be is, well, then you would bypass any referendum question. They would have no reason at all not to call for it if Martin's won his case, let's say in January. The chances are of going through all the appeals things before the May election, in which case then it could be done in 2021. But that is the only way it can be done, I agree with you.
I don't think it can, because if you take the 6 months, so the Electoral Commission wants 6 months. So given that the Parliament will be back in sometime in May, and then they have to put through their bill, even without a challenge, it still will take you to Christmas, which is not the time. But
it could be done before May. It could be done before May if Mark wins his case.
Well, let's see. So we can talk. So the alternatives are a vote in an election on a manifesto stating independence. Interestingly, this was SNP policy up to 2001, that a majority of MPs would be a mandate for independence or a vote in an election. And it's a very common way in the world to actually get independence. It's just to have a vote of your parliament. Sometimes when I'm speaking about this, I feel it's a bit fantasy because I can't see what's going to change between now and May. I'd like it to change between now and May, but who is going to lead us? Because I am absolutely 100% certain that Nicola Sturgeon will not be changing the policy before May. The reason is they're high in the polls, they go on about the polls all the time. Politicians, when they're high in the polls, they're not going to change anything. And it really doesn't matter what the SNP says, because if there's a National Assembly at the end of the month, they can say what they like. It's a talking shop. Keith Brown writes the manifesto under Nicola's guidance. That manifesto is revealed 3 weeks before the polling day. There's no way a manifesto 3 weeks on before polling day is going to have anything in it but some warm words about some kind of agreed referendum, Scotland's right to choose, something like that, because no party would just throw a hand grenade basically into the whole, campaign, the 5 or 6 week campaign when you're ahead in the polls, cruising for a majority. So nothing's going to change unless there's a massive shake-up. And it's not going to change from within the SNP. I don't think so. The SNP are set, their course is set for another decade of Tory rule.
Section 30. Everyone says, will they grant a Section 30? Yes, they will. No, they won't. It's the completely wrong understanding of what a Section 30 is. Section 30 in the Scotland Act permits the UK government to change every dot, comma, paragraph, sentence in the Scotland Act. So when you say, Denise, now I know exactly what you meant when you say dismiss the Section 30 route, that will be used against us. It's not something we can sit down and simply say, can we have a Section 30, please? It will be used against us. That is what's going to happen. And you're quite right about the manifesto day. When this show goes out, there will be only 116 days between the Tuesday when this appears and the 6th of May. That's it, 116 days. You've got the ISP saying, let's look at a plebiscite. Fine. But you then need the SNP to sign up to a plebiscite. But you won't know that. You're absolutely correct, Denise. You won't know what the manifesto from the SNP is until maybe weeks before the actual election day. You had other things. I said to you, I'd listened to you on the Barhead Boy interview. There are other things that can come up. Were there a vote of confidence in Nicola Sturgeon? Were she to resign? It could lead to another election, virtually called immediately. You don't have to wait till May. There are other things that can happen between now and May. Could anyone like to take up? Dave, you've talked about things along the lines of exactly what we're talking about with Martin Keatings. It's another area where the Lord Advocate seems to wear two heads.
Two hats.
Two hats.
And two faces.
Whatever. You reckon that the Martin Keatings thing is an avenue that will apply? I saw Peter Bell arguing against it this morning.
I think basically the Keatings case is following the same track as the Whiteman case did that went to Europe, and it was one for one particular reason, that the UK didn't put arguments against it. They just tried to have it dismissed all the way down the line, and eventually it went through and they had no argument against it, so they won the case. the same thing seems to have happened with Martin's. When the final closed document was put through, as far as I know, there are no arguments against it, just arguments as to why it shouldn't be heard. And if that goes down the same road, then Martin will win his case. But the thing is, last night, Jim Keatons posted two posts about affidavits that had gone in from Westminster MPs, Kenny McCaskill and Angus McNeill.
Yeah.
Basically, which now brings the political sphere into it as well. As I say, I think Martin's got a good chance on what I've heard. I don't know all the information, but on what I've heard, I think he's got a good chance that they'll find for him, simply because the UK government, in their arrogance, have decided, no, we're going to get it thrown out. We'll throw a load of money at it and we'll get it thrown out. Well, they've not been successful so far. So I'm hoping that's going to happen. I have faith in the Scottish court system. I've got no faith in the Crown Office or the Procurator Fiscal Office, but I do have faith in the courts, because everything I've seen so far from the courts this year has actually come out on the side of justice, in spite of all the money and all the shit that have been thrown into the pot to try and make it not happen. So I've just realised I was recording it. Okay, well, so sometimes I swear I'm Scottish. I think Martin's got a good chance of it, and as far as what Denise was saying earlier on, I've been following the 4 Women thing as well this week, and I hope they win that as well. And it's the first time ever that I've actually hoped that something actually was under Westminster control and not the Scottish Parliament.
Let me follow on, Dave. Let's assume Martin Keatings wins and the court decides that the Scottish Parliament is perfectly entitled to hold a referendum. There's 4 of us on here at the moment. Let's ask each of us, do you think the SNP will immediately pick up that ball and announce a referendum? Denise?
Well, the problem I think we have with the SNP, I think it's unlikely. There's 2 parts to becoming independent. One is establishing the democratic will to be independent. So we could do that. But once we demonstrate we want to be independent, we then have to somehow get Westminster to negotiate with us our independence. And therefore, I don't believe that the SNP are prepared or up for it or ready for that fight, because it would be a fight. But we would be in a better position if we have already established that Scotland wants independence to have that discussion with Westminster. At the moment, we're in a position of complete weakness. We haven't established the will for independence. We need to do that first. But then we need a fighter. We need a really good fighter to do the negotiations. So that's where I see our problem. Our problem is, firstly, we have to establish we want independence. So if Martin Keating's case is won, it certainly puts pressure on the SNP leadership then. They can't hide behind a Section 30 anymore. They have to do something. But are they prepared for the fight? And I don't think they're prepared for the fight.
Mark, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, Denise touched on it earlier, but there is a very serious lack of strategic thinking at the heart of the SNP, and they simply don't know how they're going to deliver independence. That's been evident, obviously, for a long time. But I think much more seriously than that is there seems to be an incredible level of naivety about the type of state that we are up against and what it is prepared to do to undermine never mind the strategy, but our attempts to deliver that. And we've not even We've not even scratched the surface. You only have to look across the water to Ireland to see the extent that they do. I used to get all the time, you're working for a Russian-funded media organisation that routinely kills journalists, imprisons them, etc. The British state, what they did in Ireland, members of the military were going out and deliberately shooting dead civilians that they knew were completely innocent. The military research force that was created during the height of the Troubles was actually using IRA weaponry to try and discredit the IRA and the Republican movement there by deliberately killing civilians. And these were British soldiers. So if they're capable of doing that, they're capable of doing anything.
And they've just put a bill through Westminster Parliament that allows the security services to kill folk at will if they think it affects national security or the economics. So, yeah.
Well, commit crime. I mean, is that the Security Intelligence Service, MI5, MI6, have the authority to conduct any form of criminality to protect their agents. That includes including rape, murder, anything that to protect their cover. That's an outrage in a democratic society. But going back to the point I was making, the SNP the leadership seem hopelessly naive that if they just play ball and they politely ask that the British state is going to roll over and play cricket. We've no intention of doing that. And they need to get real about that. And I can't see it. I mean, my big fear about the SNP leadership, and this goes back to, I think, something I've mentioned before. I've had it on good authority. It was Andrew Wilson who gave this quote. When John Swinney was a party leader in, I think it was 2003, 2002, there was a quote given to the Scotland on Sunday newspaper that said, it was a source very close to John Swinney. I've spoken to the journalist who did it. He's told me it was Andrew Wilson. But that quote, that source said, ultimately, Scottish nationalists, the Yes movement, are going to have to reconcile themselves with something less than full independence. Hence the endless press releases we had in the run-up to the 2014 referendum from the SNP extolling the virtues of Devo Max. The far outstripped press releases extolling the virtues of independence. And that gave me a real flavour of the direction, the ultimate course that this leadership are on. And in my view, we're either free or we're not. There's no half ground. Listen, we cannot be tied to this Tory regime. It's so far right. They're going to be in power potentially for 18 years. We have to escape it. There are real and present danger to our people now.
See, here's a perspective that I have in things at the moment. We know that the argument between Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon has divided people who would normally be called Yes. We know there's going to be, I'll keep coming back to this money that is or isn't involved and what Douglas Chapman has to say. That could erupt into other problems. But the one thing I know, and it's the thing Dave knows I go on about, my focus is only on independence. No matter how prepared I often say we are for it. Think of the march in Edinburgh. Think of the march in Glasgow. Either of the two biggest marches we've had. And I was a steward at all the marches during that time. And I watched hundreds of thousands of people march with only one question: what do you want? And the answer was independence. When do you want it? The answer was now. And despite all the differences that might exist within the Yes movement, and we'll see more of them over the coming months, I think there's going to be a lot of contention. If those marches were asked to go over a bridge which said, this bridge takes you to Scottish independence, I don't think there's one of them would still be arguing with each other. We'd all be across that bridge. And that's the answer we've got to find for Scotland. How do we get across the bridge? It's not Section 30. There's delays and everything else. Dave knows I'm trying to work on something just now. I'm hopeful I can maybe come out with it, but it depends, I think, in the Martin Keating's case. But basically for me, that's my final cry to everyone. No matter how much you fall out with someone else that is Yes, remember when it comes to that bridge, take their hand, grab their shoulder, march across it, because Scotland, and you're absolutely right, Mark, Scotland needs to become independent, and we're absolutely a crucial period for that.
Listen, I would say one thing. I can understand the devout loyalists, if you like, of Nicola Sturgeon to a certain extent, because, like us, you know, most of the rank and file of the SNP, they want what we want. They want independence, and they see any criticism of the leadership as potentially holding us back. Now, if I believed for a moment that this leadership and Nicola Sturgeon could actually deliver independence in the next 2 years or 5 years even, I might rein it back if I believed that. But all of the evidence I've seen, all of the people I've spoken to, and bear in mind, and I know Nicola as well. She's no intention of delivering independence. So that is why we must, I think there is division, and there's going to be more because there's a lot more material still to come out. We've barely scratched the surface. So we are going to have some kind of change of leadership to unify, because one thing's for absolute certain, now that Brexit has happened, agreement in place, unionism is going to consolidate itself, and it's going to come hunting after the Yes movement in Scotland, because that's the biggest threat now to the integrity of the United Kingdom. And you're already seeing signs of that.
Yeah.
So there are going to be ructions, there's stuff going to be coming out that's going to cause further disruption to the movement. But we can come together, but we can't do it under this leadership. And there's no point doing it under this leadership because they're not going to deliver independence.
But we need a leader. That's my thing. We need a leader of the independence movement that will get us independence, or we need leaders. We need a team, but nobody is stepping forward. And we are left with ISP, who has run Colette, my friend, and she is a lovely, lovely person. And they are trying to get together this list party, ISP, with like no money, you know, funding it themselves, doing all their time to do it, really well-meaning, you know, videos on social media. Really, come on, there's people out there that owe us to come on and be our leader to this. Don't leave it to these grassroots people. There's professional politicians that are getting paid big bucks to be politicians that should be stepping up. And with the honourable exceptions of Angus MacNeil, Kenny McCaskill, Joanna Cherry, and a few others who are MPs, you know, where are their leaders? And even Alex Salmond, I think Alex Salmond owes it to us to come back. Now, I know he's gone through hell and it is awful, but he is a leader. He should come back and help us, because without him, we've been going the wrong direction since he left. We've had 6 years, we've got no money, we've not got any legal certainty because the Scottish government didn't go to court. We're hoping Martin will give us some. The civil service isn't working on policies for independence. The party itself hasn't done a policy paper in 18 months. We've got an unworkable strategy and no fight. And we've run 3 failed campaigns for the people's vote, stopping Brexit and stopping Boris, when we could have been campaigning for independence. It's like 6 wasted years. So Alex has a duty to come back, I would say.
I think what his absolute priority at the moment is to work through the legal processes and to tell his side of the story. I'm not his spokesperson by any stretch of the imagination, but I think, let him speak. Once he speaks, I think it will be quite clear what's going to happen. So,
Mark, an inquiry was established, and as I understand it, the inquiry right out to everyone and say, we want evidence on the following. And that is what he is doing at the moment. I think it's very, very similar to the judge letter. I always get this bit wrong, that bit about misleading Parliament. That is also where he will require evidence. And the fact that evidence is produced, it can be argued about. People can put forward a different version of what exactly is there. But at the end of the day, there will be a result, and no one should be criticised. Where the criticism comes in is on the Craig Murray side, where he said, I need the evidence to defend myself. Sorry, you're not getting it. That is absolutely, you can't call it criminal, but that's what it is.
That's the wild card. Goes back right to the start of this. We are dealing with a level of corruption. I've no doubt about it, and that's not just my view. That's the view of senior criminal lawyers I've spoken to, and senior political figures, and we've got a big problem because, listen, they've tried to jail Alex, they've tried to jail me, they're trying to jail other people, Craig Murray, and it's staggering, really. So they're not playing ball, but Alex, I know for certain, he is absolutely determined to work through the process, which is the way that should have happened in the first place. We wouldn't have had this mess had senior officials not acted unlawfully, and he's done the right thing there. I mean, he was badly misreported the other day in terms of people saying, why is he attacking? Why now? Why is he? Well, he was required to submit his evidence. He's done that. He's not actually spoken directly, publicly about what's taken place. Yeah. But my advice to the wider movement is to make sure you're sitting down when he finally speaks, because, like I say, we've only scratched the surface of what's taking place, and it's outrageous.
Well, we called this programme Skullduggery. That was Dave's request, and I think that's what we're going to see come out.
Indeed.
Dave, I've had my wee speech. I'm done.
Thanks very much, Denise and Mark, for coming along and talking to us. As I say, like we're getting to a point where it looks like we're going to have to do it ourselves, because at the end of the day, our so-called leaders seem to just be trying to make sure that they get elected for another 5 years so they can introduce GRA and hate crimes policy. And I put up a post yesterday saying I'll make a prediction now that in 2026, we'll be heading up towards the election. And what will be happening is Nicola will be promising us indirect too if we vote her through for another thing, and I'll be sitting. It will be compulsory for women to have penises, and I will be sitting in Saughton 5 years through a 7-year sentence for complaining about it.
I mean, that is horribly likely.
Mark, thank you very, very much for being here, and Denise, thank you as well.
Okay.
Thanks very much, guys.
Yeah. Bye.